Well, I'll begin with working on the farm. We had chickens. We had cattle. We had horses when I was young. That's what my grandfather used, was horses, which were my absolute favorite, along with the dog, the great big dog that we had. And so when Dad took over the farm, he decided that he wasn't as adept with horses as my grandfather was. My grandfather was a horseman. My father didn't. Well, my father liked horses, but the horses wouldn't mind him. They didn't want to do what my father wanted them to do. So he decided that he wanted to have a tractor instead. So this was 1950 now. And he decided, I came home from school one day and there was a big red tractor sitting in the yard. I didn't realize until later on that evening when we go out to feed the animals that the horses were gone.
Oh, goodness.
And it's like, oh my word, where are the horses? Well, they traded the horses in for
the
money
tractor?
to put down on the tractor.
Oh, wow.
So that ruined my whole life. Because my big goal was to drive those horses, and my grandfather always told me when I was old enough that he would teach me to drive the horses. And so I was heartbroken for a while over the horses. But my dad told me, "Oh, Bob, you'll get to love the tractor." And I said, "I don't know about that," but anyway, I got to drive it a lot because Dad taught me to drive the tractor. I was so small driving the tractor that I couldn't sit on the seat. And the handle, you know, the steering wheel's up here, and the gas on the steering column. But you had to have the clutch in to shift.
Yep.
And your shifter was there too. You know, I can't remember how it was put together, except that I couldn't reach the clutch, and I couldn't push it with one foot. And I would hang onto the steering wheel, and I'd jump onto the clutch with both feet. So I could shift. So it was all, you know, it was a learning curve for sure. And I got so that I could master it. And so Dad would come in from working in the fields, you know, and of course I'd be working in the house with Mom with the kids, and you know, all day is, you know, taking care of babies and the house and so on, bringing clothes in off the line and all that kind of stuff. Not that I didn't find some time to play, but not much, not a lot.
Yeah.
And so Dad would come in and he'd say, "Okay, Barb, you're going to work with me tomorrow," or "You're going to work with me this week," which meant that I was going to the fields with Dad and to the barn. And
Did you enjoy that?
oh, that, yes.
Yeah.
That made my day. Oh, yes. All right. Because I loved being out in the fields, and I loved being outside, and, you know, I wasn't really a house person. I was a tomboy.
Yeah. You wanna
And
be
I'd
out
like to
cycling.
be out, you know, and I like to be out and about and doing things. So I would go out with Dad, whatever chores he had me to do. And it was usually driving the tractor, or him driving the tractor and me working the equipment behind it, which, or we'd take turns on, you know, doing. So we had, if we were haying, for instance, we would rake the hay, but no, first we would mow the hay with the mower. And when you came to the corners of the field, you had to lift the big mower blade up.
Oh, wow.
We were mowing with the big, you know, the old-fashioned, I don't know, it was like a sidearm
Yeah.
mower. And so you'd have to lift that mower blade up when we'd turn the corners.
Mm-hmm.
I could do it, but sometimes, you know, I would get tired.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad would say, okay, I'm going to teach you how to make the corners with the tractor, because you had to take the tractor out farther off the field
Mm-hmm.
in your headland, like, and turn to come in,
Yeah.
so that you came in straight, you know, and so that he could ride the mower,
Mm-hmm.
and I would drive the tractor. So, yeah, so we would mow like that. After the mowing was done, you'd wait a day or so, and you'd go out with the hay rake, which the hay rake raked the hay up into furrows,
Mm-hmm.
so that you could drive the tractor and the wagon down through to pick your hay up. We didn't have what they called a tedder, which, you know, spreads the hay out,
Mhm.
like, further to dry. We would just let it dry, turn it. We might have to turn it twice, you know, with the rake, and so the hay rake was another thing that had to be lifted. So you're raking across the field instead of up and down the field.
Mhm.
You're across the field and you're making these furrows across. So about every 8 or 10 feet, you would have to lift you'd have to lift the hay rake and let the hay drop in the furrow.
Mm.
And then you put it back down and you go your next 10 feet or 12 feet or whatever and lift your hay rake again. So you were, you know,
That's a lot of
it was
lifting.
quite a workout.
That's a lot of lifting.
And for a little girl, it was a
Yeah.
lot. But I loved it. And so I would, you know, I'd like to do some of that. And then I'd drive,
Mhm.
and Dad would do more.
How much land were you doing?
We had 75 acres there. Of course, it wasn't all crops.
Yeah.
It was, they would separate it out, and every year they would change the crop rotation
Mm-hmm.
around so that we would have pasture land, enough for the cattle.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would have a grain field.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't always necessarily one. It might be 2 small fields, or however they set it up. We'd have potatoes, grain, hay,
Mm-hmm.
fields, and the pasture land. So that would be, you know, and switched around every year,
Mhm.
so that everything, you know, for your rotation. When it came haying, you know, bringing the hay in,
Mm-hmm.
then it was wagon, and we had no baler,
Mm-hmm.
so it was all loose hay.
Yeah.
And so the loose hay would be pitched up onto the wagon,
Mm-hmm.
and someone would be riding on the top of the wagon. So it was usually my grandfather, my uncle, my dad,
Mm-hmm.
the 3 of them working, you know, and I wasn't always out there. Then Dad would drive the tractor and they'd pitch, or you know, however.
Mm.
But they'd get a great big, I mean, they'd have the sides on the wagon, they'd put them on
Mm-hmm.
for the haying season, and then they'd take them off again after haying season was over. So that then you got your flatbed trailer.
Yeah.
And so in potatoes, well, it would be grain season. No, it'd be the grain season first. So the grain, we usually grew oats.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't grow wheat.
Mm-hmm.
We grew oats. And so they taught me that the oats weren't ripe until the stalk was yellow all the way to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And when that was yellow all the way to the ground, and you know, then your oats were ripe.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would harvest then the oats, and then we would be out there with the hay rake again in the oat field after it was harvested
Mm-hmm.
to pick up the straw
Yeah.
after the oats had been threshed out of it. And so the straw in the barn, the straw went in the left mow
Mm-hmm.
of the barn, which is like your second story over your stalls, and the hay went in the right.
Mhm.
And the middle of the barn is where your hay wagon usually sat, in the middle of the barn, or ours did, sat in the middle of the barn. And it was there mostly year round.
So when you would put like the hay and stuff up, it was just loose up there?
It was
just
all loose.
piles of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So in order to put the hay and the straw up into the mounds, there were back doors on the barn. You didn't really notice them when they were all closed, because the boards went across to hold them in there.
Yeah.
But when it was haying season and time to bring the straw in, they would take those doors out, and so that they could pull the hay wagon in. This is with the horses now. With the tractor, they could back it in.
Yeah.
But with the horses, they would take those doors out, and they would drive the horses through, bring the hay wagon in and leave it. Take the horses around to the front, and they would hook the horses to the hay fork ropes and pulley.
Okay.
So that the hay fork came down into the wagon, picked up a load of hay like this, and then the horses would haul it off. The hay fork would go up, and it would have a rope on it that went into the mow, so that whoever's in the mow now, somebody's in the wagon putting the fork into the hay. Someone's driving the horses to pull the hay fork up. Someone's in the mow with the rope to pull the hay fork in and drop it. And then push it back out, and off they'd go again with the next load. So it was really interesting to watch that. I always wanted to be out there when I was real little to see this, because that was the horses, too.
Because you love the horses.
And my grandfather, of course, then was taking care of me, my grandparents. And my grandfather said, well, when you get big enough, then you can come out and watch. Until then, I had to sit on the step of the shed and watch from a distance. So he took me out one day. He said, okay, because it would take several days for this process to be happening. And it was like the last day of haying season, and he said, okay, I'm going to take you out today so that you can watch. And he had put a potato barrel in the corner of the barn inside, in the corner. And he stood me in the potato barrel. And he said, now, you're going to stay there. You're not going to move. You're going to stay there. If you want to watch, you can stay there. And I could remember with my hands on the barrel, standing in the barrel, seeing it all happening. And then he would back the trailer in. But the system was the same. They still had to, put the hay rake in and lift the hay and so on. It just wasn't as exciting as the horses.
The horses were more fun.
All those stupid little things were just so exciting to me.
That'd be exciting to me now.
I know.
I would totally watch that.
Even, I don't know if other kids found things as,
It was interesting for you.
It was interesting, and I loved it. And I loved learning all these things, and watching. That's how I learned most everything, watching. You learn a lot if you watch.
Absolutely.
Pay attention. But my grandfather milked every morning and every night, milked the cows.
How many did you have?
We had up to 7 cows. So they were selling the milk, and the cream and so on. So he would be out there at like 4 a.m. milking the cows before breakfast. And then he'd be out in the fields all day. The men would be out in the fields all day working. And then he'd milk the cows again at night after supper. Grampy would milk the cows, put the cows out
Mm-hmm.
to water, clean their stalls, and he would go up and put straw down, because straw was the bedding. Put the straw in through the window of the stalls.
Mm-hmm.
He had these board windows that he had up with a strap,
Mm-hmm.
and he'd let that board window down on each stall. Each cow had its own stall.
Mm-hmm.
He'd put those board windows down, and then he'd fork the straw in while they were outside,
Yep.
and bed their stalls all down. And he also had the same kind of a system, but a bigger window,
Mm-hmm.
where he forked all the manure outside. So we had this big manure pile up back of the barn. And we never thought too much about it, it was just natural, everyday stuff to us. So he forked that manure out, of course it's all mixed with the straw from, and so on. And so it would make a great big mound out there of manure. The best place to dig worms for fishing.
Mm.
Yeah,
Oh, I
along
bet.
the edge of that, yeah, along the edge of that manure pile. So anyway, for the cows, they would go down to the brook for water
Mm-hmm.
while Grampy's doing their stalls. They'd go down through the path and go to the brook to drink, and they'd come back up, and they'd be ready to come in and have their clean stalls all prepared, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that would happen. Well, I don't know if he cleaned. I know he cleaned the stalls in the mornings, and that probably was it for the day. That was probably it for the day, because the cows were out in the pasture,
Mm-hmm.
during the day. And they'd come into their clean stalls in the afternoon, supper time.
Mm-hmm.
And after I moved over with Dad and Mom, and we got a little older, and Pat got a little older, and Gary was little, and this one particular year they decided that they would pasture the cows on the other side of the lake where we lived. Instead of putting a crop in there, they would pasture the cows over there that year. So our job was to go after supper and drive the cows over
Mm-hmm.
up through what they called the new land, which was behind the lake, where they had cut wood off.
Mm-hmm.
And they always called it new. My grandfather called it new land because that's how they used to make their fields years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Was they would cut the wood off, then they would pull the stumps,
Mm-hmm.
and they would have a new piece of land.
Yep.
So he always called that piece up there, although it was never used for that reason. It was always used to grow wood. He always called that the new land.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a path through it. So we would drive the cows up from our pasture on our side, up through the new land and down on the other side of the lake, which was all wood. It's all wooded.
Mm-hmm.
To the barn, or to the barn. And so this one day, we decided that Gary would go with us. He was getting bigger. He was about 4, maybe. He was going to go with Pat and I. He wanted to go drive the cows over. So it was okay. So as it turned out, there was a piece of barbed wire fence that if the cows came down before we came over,
Mm-hmm.
Grampy would put the barbed wire fence up so that they wouldn't go back up into the new land, because they would get up in there and wander around. You couldn't find them.
Yeah.
And, well, you'd find them, but it would be a hunt, to find them and get them rounded up and get them back on the path and so on. So if they did come down by themselves, he would put that piece of fence across to keep them down there.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course here we are, we're walking along and the cows are nowhere in sight, and we think, okay, they're ahead of us. And we looked through the new land, we didn't see any. So it's like, okay, they're ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
So we're walking along, Pat and I, of course, we're talking and laughing, carrying on whatever we were doing. And Gary's running on ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we told him not to. We told him, you stay with us, you don't run ahead. But he did anyway. And he ran into the barbed wire fence.
Oh.
And he cut his arm open on the barbed wire. So we had kind of a disaster going
Yeah.
on. We were close to the house at least,
Mhm.
you know, because that was down just before you got to the barn.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course I'm sending Pat, you go get Grammy or Grampy, you know, Gary's bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to get him, you know, situated and get that stopped
Mm-hmm.
bleeding. And it had cut like a hole, like a barbed wood, cut like a V shape. And I think that he always had that scar there on his arm.
I bet.
All his life. You'd say, oh, Gary, remember that. You know, that wasn't a good time. But anyway, we got him into the house, and of course, Grammy bandaged him all up and bathed it in whatever. They used to bathe everything in liniment and iodine.
Mm-hmm.
Iodine was like, when you saw that iodine bottle come out, it's like, oh no. No, not iodine. It stung like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, so did the alcohol or whatever else they put on. But anyway,
How did you drive them? You
we
walk?
just walked
You
behind
just
them,
walking? Okay.
and they'd go.
Okay.
You know, they knew what they were supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We just walked behind, you know. Once we got up there in the field, they knew what they were supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of all line up and
And just go.
walk around. Yeah. So we only had about 4 cows then
Mm-hmm.
at that point. I remember when I was a little younger, you know, at Grammy and Grampy's, they had up to 7.
Mm-hmm.
But they were selling the milk and the cream and everything at that point and needed the extra.
And you guys were making butter and all that
Yeah,
too, right?
making butter and, yeah. Yeah, well, we were past that point now when Dad and Mom, of course, everything was more modern.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were buying their butter in the store,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that kind of stuff, until they decided that they were going to buy margarine, which was pits.
Yeah. That's not good
It's like,
stuff.
what is that? Yes, we had about 4 cows when we were bringing the cows down at that time.
Mm-hmm. And did you help milk?
I did help milk, but I loved the sound of the milk going into the pail.
Mm-hmm.
And we always drank fresh milk right from the cow.
Mm-hmm.
We never had homogenized,
Yeah.
pasteurized,
All the
any of
stuff
those
now.
things were, no.
Yeah.
We drank milk right from the cow.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't as good warm, but it was nice when it was cool.
Yeah.
You know. Dad started working away,
Mm.
and Grampy was milking the cows, and it was getting a lot for him. He was getting to be an older man, and
Mm-hmm.
he was in his 70s, and he was milking 4 cows in the morning and 4 at night.
Mm.
And so I was getting to be like 12, you know, and I said, well, I can help you milk. So I helped him milk for, I think, 1 winter.
Mm-hmm.
I helped him milk. And then the next year they sold the cows off because Dad was away.
Mm-hmm.
And now the cows are gone.
Mm-hmm. So the things that you were producing, you were selling.
Yes. Yeah. We were selling the potatoes. Well, the potatoes was our big money crop.
Okay.
Potatoes were our money crop then.
Mm-hmm.
And we were doing pretty well as far as the potatoes were concerned. And everybody was doing well.
Mm-hmm.
And then the corporate farming was kind of taken over.
Yeah.
And when that started taking over, the price of potatoes dropped, you know, because they were getting bigger machinery and more potatoes a glut in the market, and the price of potatoes was dropping,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So that was kind of like the downfall for us,
Mm-hmm.
as far as the farm was concerned. Of course, fire was always the nemesis of anything to do with the farm.
Yeah.
The house, the barn, anything to do with the farm. And we had a lightning storm, and the lightning hit the grain field, of all places,
Oh wow.
and started a fire in the grain field. And all the men took off.
Mm-hmm.
Someone yelled that there's a fire in the grain field. They all took off with blankets and old coats and whatever they could grab to beat that fire out. So, of course, we all went, even, all of us went out there to see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And the men are all out there in the field beating the fire out, which they did, get it out. But it would have burned the whole field.
You would have lost that whole thing.
Would have lost the whole field. And we always raised enough grain for our own animals.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have extra that we would sell, or that Grampy would have it ground into mash for the pigs and the cows and so on.
Yeah.
Every year the cows would come in with, have a calf.
Mm-hmm.
So they would keep the female calves, and they would sell the little steer calves after they were weaned off the mother and eating on their own and so on. And they would sell them. So that was extra cash.
So you guys never actually would butcher a cow for your own
No,
to keep some meat?
no.
No.
No, sometimes though, if they were having them butchered,
Mm-hmm.
then they would get maybe so many pounds of beef or something like that. But we didn't have a lot of beef.
Mm-hmm.
We had more beef after I went with Dad and Mom, because Dad liked beef, and he would get a beef roast or steaks or something, as a special occasion type of thing, because it was expensive.
Yeah.
And we usually had pork, chicken. I told you about Dad bringing home the big turkey, and we had never seen a bird that big.
Yeah.
That was so funny. It's like, what is that? To us, it looked like an ostrich. It could have been. I talk mostly about the farm, and not the house and the housework and all of that good stuff that goes along with it. Because my grandmother and my mother always baked their own bread. So they would bake bread usually a couple of times a week. On Saturdays, a lot of times, make a loaf of brown bread, which is Canadian brown bread, not the kind you get in the can, not like the Boston brown bread. Like, it was just regular bread, but it was molasses and oatmeal and so on. And so we would have that with our beans on Saturday night. And then, speaking of that, people here in the States and around had never heard of having pancakes with beans.
Pancakes with beans.
Pancakes for supper.
Oh, I've had pancakes
with beans on them.
With beans.
With beans.
I've heard of like toast and beans and like
that's English.
In England and stuff, but I've never heard pancakes.
Well, instead of toast, it would be
pancakes
with beans, and we usually had either hot dogs or a pork, pork chop, kind of, with it, and that was kind of a Canadian, I guess, maritime, Canada, Canadian thing. And you talk about it here, and people, it's like
never
heard of it.
I think a lot of us have heard of the toast and beans, but this is the first time I'm hearing about pancakes.
Pancakes and beans.
With it,
So next time you come on a Saturday, and we'll have pancakes and beans and pork.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pork and beans with some pancakes.
Yeah. No, not that kind of pork
Yeah,
and beans. Homemade beans. I'll
Homemade
do
beans.
homemade beans, and
Mhm.
we'll have pancakes and pork.
Okay.
Mm.
Sounds good.
Applesauce.
I'll eat it all.
Yeah. Coleslaw.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh, I love coleslaw.
That's our big thing.
Mm.
So instead of having brown bread, you
Mhm.
would have, your pancakes.
Mhm.
Or if you didn't have pancakes, then you have brown bread
Okay.
and beans. Mm. Hot dogs and pork,
Mhm.
or hot dogs or pork.
Mhm.
Saturday night supper
Mm.
was always, beans. Yeah. Sunday would be a big meal.
Mhm.
A Sunday afternoon dinner we would have
Mhm.
on Sunday. An early dinner.
Yeah.
And have a big, like pork roast or chicken and stuffing and,
Mm.
yeah, potatoes and veggies and
Yeah.
so
Good
on.
stuff.
We have gravy.
Would it be your own chicken?
Gravy. Yeah, it would be
Your
our
own
own
chicken.
chicken. Yeah. So Graham had a big table in the kitchen, and on Sundays there was always family.
Yeah. Mm.
We had no phones. We had no communication.
Mhm.
We didn't know who was going to show up
Yeah.
on Sunday.
It just showed up.
Whatever part of the family wanted to show up,
Mhm.
Grammy and Grampy were always home. It
Mhm.
was like, we'll go to Grammy and Grampy's.
Mhm.
And all the kids would talk about, after church, we want to go to Grammy and Grampy's.
Mhm.
And of course, there'd be a pile of us kids, to play.
Mhm.
And it was awesome. But they had a big table, and it would be just crowded.
Mhm.
And sometimes they'd have 2 or 3 sittings. And we had a little table that, when I was little, some of our little cousins, my little cousins, would,
Mhm.
we'd sit at the little table. One time, there were so many people there, my grandmother said, because we were never allowed in the front room. The
Mhm.
front room was for company,
Mhm.
but family wasn't company.
No.
No.
Off limits.
Off limits.
Yeah.
Kids didn't go into no.
Mhm.
Kids didn't go in there. We never touched a thing in there. So this one day, we must have had a massive crowd there because Grammy said, okay, you kids can take your plates in and sit on the stairs.
Mhm.
So you put your plate on the step, one step, and sit on the
Mhm.
next step
Yep.
and eat. So we're all in there, sitting on the steps, eating our supper. And of course, one of the kids the plate had to fall off the stairway. We were supposed to be being, very good in there.
Mhm.
If you're really good, you can go sit on the steps.
Mhm.
Yeah. Of course, one of the plates fell off, and oh my God, broke the plate.
Mhm.
And my grandmother came in and said, okay, that's it, kids. Out, out of here, while she cleaned it up. And then, of course, a lot of them played instruments.
Mm.
So they never showed up at the house without their instrument.
Mm.
And they would have what they call now kitchen parties.
Yeah.
In those days, you never heard of such a thing,
Yeah.
that term.
Mhm.
But they were having kitchen parties, and they would all get out after supper. They would all get out their instruments, and they would start playing all these, songs. And some of the girls could sing, and some of the guys could sing, and they'd sing, and
That's awesome.
and have a great time. I always wished that I could sing, but I could hum pretty well. I could whistle, but my grandmother told me, well, whistling's for guys. Whistling's for men. But anyway, they'd all get playing their instruments. So my dad was fiddle.
Mhm.
And one of my other uncles played fiddle a little bit too, but Dad was the fiddle player. There were a couple of guitar players, a banjo player,
Mhm.
harmonica. Yeah, there was never any like piano or
Mhm.
anything like that. It was all the other types of instruments, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, so it was always, you know, I mean, it didn't always happen, but sometimes it would really get into a nice, big, you know, festival.
Yeah.
Kind of, you know, festive. I would say
Yeah.
festive, not festival, but festive, you know.
I can just picture that and
Weird.
kids running around outside playing
Yeah.
and just having a
Having
lot of
ball.
fun.
And you could hear the music outside, you know,
yeah.
even when you're outside playing, you could hear the music and the singing, and it's like, yeah, you go in and stand for a little bit, you know, and listen, and then you'd be back out, you know. But we had all kinds of games that we played. I mean, Red Rover,
Yeah.
Red Light, Green Light, Mother May I.
Mother May I.
Mother May I. Oh, there used to be a lot of arguments over Mother May I.
It's so funny because I played all these same games when I was a kid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and all of those games, you know, and we had a swing that my grandfather had put up, and we'd be lined up. Oh my God, we had such fun though. Yeah, as you know, as difficult as things in other respects, like, you know, in other respects, we made our own fun, and we had great times. You know, all of those memories are so still vivid. You know, to me, it's like I can just picture it all. And the funny thing is, I read the book there that I'm publishing to Carol while she was sick.
Really?
And she said, Barb, you know, I can just picture it all. Because she was little, but she remembered like the people and the things that were going on, you know. She said, I can just picture it all. To go back there and live those days over, I would do in a blink of an eye.
I will be right with you.
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved every minute of it.